Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because it is really good to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is Baltimore. Okay, all right, we're going to get going with the Jubilee. This is going to be part one. It's going to be a long series, I think. But of course, to have a Jubilee, to have parades and an exhibition to celebrate your recovery after the fire, you must, of course, first have a Great Fire, right? And the Great Fire of Baltimore took out 24 blocks of the downtown area around the Inner Harbor and caused damages estimated upwards of $80 million, which equates to about $2.1 billion today. And just to give you an example of what that looked like, I mean, here's a great shot of around City Hall. Right, the fire conveniently stops right before City Hall, and look at all this rubble that's here. And there's a couple of things about this photograph that I really like. I always look for sort of anomalous things or things that may point to photographs like this being staged. And one of the things that I noticed was this lonely girder over here. Where are the rest of the girders? That's what I'd like to know. I mean, if they were hauling them out, because I don't know the date of this photograph, if they were hauling them out, you'd think there'd be like a clear path for them, because steel girders aren't light, you know? And these men walking back here, I don't know what kind of shoes they had. They certainly didn't have thick rubber-soled work boots like they have today, but, I don't even know if you can even see their feet in this one. Do they even have feet? Curious that, to walk around on this type of rubble and debris takes a good deal of dexterity and care and balance, and not to mention the soles of their shoes. Like I said, they had to be very thin. It could not have been very comfortable. You would, I don't know. But to continue on before I get too caught up in that, right away we have the Burnt District Commission, which of course I covered in an earlier episode of Baltimore, and it was their job to get the area cleaned up and rebuilt, and they within a year, just about a year, they were planning the Jubilee, right? On March 1st, 1905. They were eyeballing May of 06 for a Jubilee, but of course, they were saying that that's tentative, that could be postponed, right? And because they want to do it right, so they say, right? And sure enough, just a couple days later, on March 8th, they put September on the board, right? And they say that could be a bigger Jubilee, right? Because they were originally thinking late 05, I think, was the original thought. Now that I'm thinking about it, but they say it needs to be September, and so President Trigo of the commission, he resigns. He's the Rebuilding Celebration Association. He resigns, and it becomes a Jubilee Commission where they put these gentlemen in charge. And I couldn't really find out much about these gentlemen except for this one here. And here they call him Mr. Jacob W. Hook. But when I looked him up, he's a colonel. He's Colonel Jacob William Hook, right? And he was born in Baltimore in 1849. His parents, to the son of Jacob and Catherine Hook, who emigrated to Maryland from Saxe, Weimar, Germany in 1847. All right, Colonel Jacob W. Hook was president of the Old Town National Bank, president of the Old Town Merchants and Manufacturers Association, director of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, director of City Salvage Bank, and the city collector. Not bad for an immigrant's son, right? Everybody of importance at some point or another was president of a bank or director on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. It's absolutely incredible. So when I went to go look through his family, I couldn't really find much through his father, so I did look up this Weimar Germany. All right, this Saxe Weimar. And it says it was one of a Saxon duchy held by the Ernestine branch of the Wettin dynasty. All right, it says the Weimar branch was the most genealogically senior extant branch of the House of Wettin. So when I look at the House of Wettin, here they have the black and gold, which is, of course, the Calverts have black and gold, and there's black and gold in the Maryland state flag today. So that's an interesting connection that will be explored coming up. Right? It says that it's a dynasty of German counts, dukes, prince-electors, and kings. Right? And it says agnates of the House of Wettin have at various times ascended the thrones of Great Britain, Portugal, Bulgaria, Poland, Saxony, and Belgium. But the British and Belgian lines retain their thrones today. So that's Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles and William and Henry and whatever their friggin' names are. It's amazing that I can tie this family, or that the House of Wettin, who were the reigning monarchs in England and Belgium, to the Hook family. And so when I look further, I just to shore that up a little bit, right? It comes through the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. So it says, from King George I to Queen Victoria, the British royal family was called the House of Hanover, being a junior branch of the House of Brunswick-Luneburg, and thus a part of the dynasty of the Guelphs. In the late 19th century, Queen Victoria charged the College of Heralds in England to determine the correct personal surname of her late husband, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and thus the proper surname of the royal family upon the accession of her son. After extensive research, they concluded that it was Wettin, but his name was never used, either by the Queen or by her son, King Edward VII, or by her grandson, King George V. They were simply kings of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. And now, of course, so that means the first Wettin king was King Edward, all right, whose son was George V, right? Whose son was Edward VIII, the guy who abdicated his throne to be with Wallace Simpson of Baltimore. And so the fact that I can tie the House Wettin to the town where my boy Colonel Jacob William Hook's parents came from, it cannot be a coincidence, right? And so he's on the Jubilee Association, and the chairman of the Jubilee Association is this gentleman here. His name is Frank Cohen. And now Frank Cohen is a relative of, I could not determine whether he was a son, a nephew, or cousin, but he is part of this Cohen family that runs A. Cohen and Company lithographers in Baltimore. And he's a very important lithographer, right? I mean, he patents a lot of lithographic techniques that end up getting used for decades, including this lithocaustic method. All right, so researching him a little bit further, all right, I found this website, and it says The Stones Speak. And now that's interesting because I found some pictures of a building, of this building here, which is a second building for them. They had offices much closer to City Hall, which coincidentally enough had a fire in it in 1902 and forced them to move, where they created this warehouse structure, allegedly, right? On the side of it is this lady here, and she's very interesting, with the press behind her and this book and the artist's palette. And association with the arts is very important to the city of Baltimore, at least certainly to its industrial leaders. And that's probably a jar of ink, the magnifying glass, a book with two portraits on it. No idea who those portraits could be. So I thought she's pretty interesting to have on the side of the building like that, right? And below her is this. And I couldn't quite make out who. I thought maybe this might be Mercury with the style helmet, but I think it's a woman in her Sunday's best, right? And it's got the rolling pin and the stone slab and the inkwell and the triangle and the paintbrushes. And underneath it says Saxe Locantor. Saxa Locantor, right? Which is Latin for the stone speak. And I think it's interesting that Saxa is very close to Saxa here, right? And here that says the stone speak right on the side. right? So it talks about the firm being established in Baltimore in 1835, and it's the oldest continuously operating lithographer in the United States. And now, it's kind of important to keep in mind that when you're trying to sell a narrative, especially one that may be a false narrative, seeing is believing. And, going back to the ancient Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans, they created massive murals and statues and things like that told the stories. And, exposure to the general public, creates an impression in your subconscious, and it becomes part of your collective memory, and you start to believe the things that you see are events that really happened. All right, and so the invention of lithography is very important because for the first time it sort of creates a way for pictures, images to be spread on a wide scale. And these guys are in it right from the beginning. Or it says right here, Edward Weber and his cousin August Cohen brought the Seinfelder lithographic process invented in Germany in the late 18th century to Baltimore. So now Alois Seinfelder is the inventor of lithography, essentially. And so in one step, you can go from the invention of lithography to Baltimore with Cohen and Company, right? So because when Weber dies, August takes it over and changes the name to his name. And as I was saying about creating visual storytelling, right? The significance of the company's work in an age in which printing was the medium for disseminating visual images that conveyed scientific knowledge cannot be overstated. Cohen specialized in precise cartographic, scientific, and pictorial illustration, producing maps that were influential in the settlement of the West and setting the national boundaries. The company printed the maps and illustrations for the Fremont expedition that mapped the 39th parallel, arbitration maps that set the boundaries of Venezuela, and the maps for the Joint Commission drawing the boundary set between Canada and the United States. So North America and South, like the Americas as we know it, map-wise, it was put upon our public consciousness through these Cohen maps, right? And it says their important work continued in the 20th century with the publication of the National Geographic Society's first bound atlas. So, our understanding of the way our world works, really begins through the maps issued through the Cohen Company, whose, family member serves on as chairman of the Jubilee Committee. And this is going to be important down the line. All right. So the Jubilee Commission is formed, and they have a job to do. And one thing they want you to know is the progress that's being made in the district, right? And that after 18 months of hauling away all that debris and throwing it down bottomless pits, and hauling it away on train cars, so as they tried to show that they did, right? Then they three-fourths rebuilt in 18 months. Now, the full project, as of September 1906, was 800 new buildings. So 3/4 of the way in 18 months with, just about a year to go, is almost 600. It's almost 600 buildings, if you want to believe that statement, which is pretty amazing, right? And they have their plan for the Jubilee. It's finally planned, right? January 18th, 1906. 4 days celebration and exposition of 2 to 4 weeks. Right? So they're not only are they going to have the Jubilee to celebrate the rebirth of the fire, they're going to have an exhibition as well that's going to, ideally attract all kinds of attention and tourism to Baltimore. Right? It's going to have parades and pageants for the Jubilee, and the exposition is going to go on for weeks after. And the Jubilee is to be held September 10th through the 14th, with the Jubilee going further. Right? They're on their way. Onward the cry for the Jubilee Commission, right? The association is to be incorporated with $250,000 authorized capital, right? So that means they're authorized to raise $250,000 by the city government, I guess, right? And that's about $7 million in today's money, right? And they sell 4,000 worth of subscriptions in the first day. But reading through, it says that the legislature is to be asked for an appropriation of $100,000 to be available when a like sum shall have been raised by the subscription. So once they get to $100,000 in subscriptions, the city is going to kick in $100,000, which is almost $3 million. So really, they're trying to ask the city for about half of it. All right, and there are other provisions as well. They have to raise an additional $25,000 as it gets closer. So they're hard at work. They're trying to raise money, and the Jubilee is on its way. And so I'm going to end the part one here, and because it's a long story, and one of the reasons it took so long is I just kept getting sucked into it. The story just keeps expanding. There's so many rabbit holes and places to go with this. And I'm really excited about the way it plays out. So I hope you enjoyed part one. Look for part two tomorrow or Wednesday, I hope. And I hope you enjoyed this one. And to the next one, cheers, guys. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on briefly some of the lithographs that the Cohen and Company made. All right, and in terms of, like I said, imprinting on the social subconscious through the visual medium, through one sheets like these that I'm going to show a few of, which were cover sheets for piano marches and things like that, but also through advertising. And we all know how advertising works subliminally on our mind and in our subconscious, right? You know, so they have, you know, when they sort of want to create an impression of history, right? They have things like the Battle of Gettysburg, right? You know, telling us what the Battle of Gettysburg looked like, or showing us, you know, the burning of Rome. I'm sure it sounded like that too. You know, through to things like Napoleon's Last Charge. There's Napoleon's Last Charge. You know, and my favorite one, which is this one here. Where is it? Signal from Mars. You know, and this goes to the scientific. You know, when they want to, you know, plant in your subconscious what the universe is like, you know, under the heliocentric model with a sphere Earth and spherical planets and stars and things like that. You know, and I think it's interesting here that this actually shows the Earth as a projection, or are they shining light on the? This is shining light on the globe, maybe. I don't know, but again, it can't be understated the importance of this type of one-sheet printing for advertisements, commercial or otherwise, you know, and for sheet music and things like this, and the effect that they have on the subconscious once you see them, you know. And so I failed to bring up a couple of these in that take, and so I just wanted to share them with you because it did come in a little bit short. But anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm looking forward to bringing you guys part two, and until then, cheers.